Hello, and welcome to Grey.com Talks. Today, we're talking with Edwin Jensen, Senior Partner and Developer at Sustainable Growth Associates and The Natural Step, an organizations that are catalyzing and accelerating company transformations toward future fitness. And if you're new to our podcast, please press subscribe button either on YouTube or your podcast app, because today we're going to learn about an organization that envisions a world where humanity thrives without compromising the natural systems it depends on. Hello, Edwin. Welcome to Grey.com Talks. We're excited to have you here.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me, Karim.
Absolutely. How would you describe the work that you and your team do at Sustainable Growth Associates and The Natural Step?
A great question. What we are doing at Sustainable Growth Associates is where we work with business to help them transform towards future fitness or towards sustainability, which is a more common term. Future fit for us is a little bit more expanded also because of all the technological accelerations that we see happening around us. And you wouldn't want to lose out on those aspects when you're trying to address sustainability. We, as a B Corp, we also represent The Natural Step, which is an NGO based around the world in many different countries. And through that organization, we've been working on sustainability topics for the past 3 decades already. Actually, it originated in Sweden.
Wonderful. The fact that you are both in terms of business and in terms of nonprofit, you're focusing on issues that are addressing sustainability, and you are raising awareness about it through the work of transformation, both in terms of business and society. That's very acknowledging. How would you describe the word future fitness, and what does it represent?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sustainability or future fitness is a term that is not always easy to for people to understand. But we see that as sustainability is a condition that you would want to be at, right? That you would want to reach. It is something that you may aspire for. Now, instead of staying in vague terms on that, we actually have a science-based understanding of what sustainability means. And if you have those conditions of what it means to be, then you can have some rules of the game in a way, or sustainability principles. Now, if you have an understanding of what that is, you can also look at the current situation of where you're at, what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong in relation to that long-term vision. And with that, you would have the gap. If you understand the gap, then it also becomes quite easy to close that gap with leapfrogging instead of only short-term solutions. We work with that definition and with this process or backcasting from sustainability with either society or business.
Mm-hmm. So the word future fitness, the term, obviously it represents sustainability. It focuses not on the short-term solutions, but rather on long-term solutions that individuals and businesses can take to prepare themselves for the better future. Is that correct?
Exactly. We all want to have a world in which we can thrive, right? It's not. It's not so nice to see in the media as well that there are quite some groups within our society that are not thriving, that are dealing with poverty issues or diversity issues, etc. But also we see climate change happening. Pollution is coming up more and more. And what you want to work towards is towards this vision of what is the world we would like to have. Now, each of us needs to do their part. Where you're an individual living in a family or a municipality, your local community, or even an entire country. But it's the same for business, with your team, with your organization overall. If you're working on that, you realize you can't do it alone. You need to work on all these different issues that there are. And wouldn't it be nice if there was one shared language or a set of design principles that you could use so that you for sure know that what you're trying to achieve is at least in the right direction?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You mentioned that as individuals, yes, we can take action. Yes, there are certain things that we can do. But at the end of the day, things that we consume, things that we operate on are mainly based on the businesses. And those businesses have the responsibility to be future adapt and to be more sustainable. And unfortunately, within those businesses, it's not one day thing that can be done. So you mentioned all the functions of the business need to come together to understand that, and there needs to be guiding principles that can assist them through the transition if they want to, but the transition that is needed, whether they want or they do not want. There are
Exactly.
there are many businesses that are focusing on the old principles, that are that are running businesses that the way they have been running for the past 50 years, 100 years, and they don't really want to change. How would you communicate to them the importance of the change, and how can they adapt to the new change of towards sustainability?
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, huh? And we recently actually did a study on that with more than 50 companies in Europe, with leaders, mostly C-suite and the first level underneath. And one of the things that we learned is actually that most business leaders we interviewed, they saw the various topics at a global level of climate change and all these kind of aspects happening. And then when you ask them, so what is sustainability for you? It was always difficult to give an answer, but they very clearly understood that the many changes that are currently happening that are related to sustainability and their business is actually providing this business case. So if you see the changes in regulations right now by the EU that is moving towards a Green Deal, and if you understand that more and more, especially the younger people, don't want to work for organizations that are not aligned with their way of thinking, organizations that are actually contributing to the problem and not so much to the solution. It's less and less attractive for people to work, for clients to buy the products, for the various stakeholders. Basically, investors are more and more scrutinizing it. The national governments are looking at the topic. So you see more and more that people are requiring business to change. Now, if you don't get that as a business leader and you don't want to make money or on innovation by making sure that you change in the right direction, well, then it's fine to wait a few years more before you're basically a dinosaur.
Mm-hmm. That's quite an interesting research and the insights that your researchers brought. You mentioned that the society itself and the government and the consumers are ready for change, and they are asking for change. And if businesses are not ready, they are eventually going to run out. If we take into the example, for instance, a company that produces plastic straws, right? So now everyone is saying that, oh, we don't, everyone is moving towards using a reusable straws or not using straws at all. So if the company is like, oh, I want to keep doing this, producing plastic ones, then they are gonna, after 2-3 years, they are gonna be out of business. So they need to realize that they need to adapt to the changes in the consumer behavior as well as the regulations that are in place. So that's
Absolutely.
very interesting. But let's get back to the topic of how can companies transform themselves. Yes, we mentioned about the regulations that are put in place, the consumers that are asking for change, but what inside the company that needs to happen in terms of organizational structure, in terms of values, in terms of innovation. Could you please describe that based on the results of the research and as well as your expertise?
Yeah, of course. One of the main things that you would need as an organization is to have a sense of direction of where you want to move towards. And if you have a better understanding of where you want to be, then it's much easier to start aligning between people. I mean, when you have a new topic, and that might be sustainability or anything else, usually what organizations do is they say, yeah, we're going to commit to this particular topic. We think it's important, right? But they don't know yet what it is about. So they start researching, they start thinking about it, they start talking and having conversations, etc. But they don't really have that direction yet. So that's what they'll set. But if you do that on the basis of the wrong understanding of what sustainability is, then basically you're still running in all kinds of directions because you're following the many tools or labels that are out there. What you would like to have, and this is the number one thing for organizations to work on, is a clear shared ambition for success on the topic of sustainability, and to ensure that you do not only have that vision, but that you have clear strategic goals that you can work towards, that are ambitious enough so that they can be set for a longer term. And once you have that longer term strategic goals, you can then move back on the more near term goals, I would say. And basically that would result at a certain point into, what am I going to do on Monday morning? But that direction, that shared language, that I would say is the most important. And of course, there are a lot of details. It depends on where, which function, whether it's HR or sales or R&D, on what to then work on specifically. But that's a next step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Having a clear vision that is not just a strategy we talked earlier, but is strategic, and that is focusing on long-term solution. And once you see and envision a future that is based on the strategic plans that you have built, then you can divide it into the short-term, mid-term, and long-term actionable points where you can work towards to. So then that clear vision needs to be set, and then once the clear vision that is future fit, that is sustainable, then it can be broken down into smaller things that whether you mentioned people from HR, people from sales, or people from R&D can take and implement on. As a sustainable growth organization, consulting organization, as well as a nonprofit organization, you have built development practices to help organizations achieve future fitness. Could you please tell us what are those practices that you have developed, and how are they impacting the organizations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have basically three different development practices. There's for leadership, there's one level that's more at the personal level. It's what each individual can do. And I would say that that is not just sustainability. It's just also clear communications with the people around you to ensure that individuals can be as efficient and effective as possible. A second development practice is more at the business level. And this is where you have your processes and your organizational structure, and that all need to be aligned, basically running it like an engine, not a fossil fuel driven, of course, but like an engine. And then we have the enterprise development area, where we are really looking at the context of the organization and the industry in which it is based, the long-term view, but also how it relates to all these different stakeholders, and of which one of them is the environment, and one of them is society overall. And those are, as we can see from the past, too often forgotten. So with those three different development practices, which are all related, the individual, the organization, and how it runs, but also where do you move on a more strategy level. And with regards to sustainability, of course, each of these are relevant, right? You need to ensure that individuals are also feeling well and can communicate well. Now, this enterprise level is, in my opinion at least, the most relevant for organizations to work on in these changing times, where contextual changes, what we see happening around us, is changing at a faster and faster rate.
Mm-hmm. Those are, as explained by you, are three essential practices that takes into consideration different stakeholders. So for the first one, you mentioned it's individual stakeholders, whether it's a employee at a different structure, then it comes within that organization itself, the whole company itself. But then the next one is the industry itself. So each part of the equation of how the business is built can take part in building sustainable and relevant, you mentioned, process that can ensure that the company is ready to transform and ready for the changes that are ahead of them. The organization, your NGO organization, Natural Step, is also focusing on sustainability. Could you please tell us some of the projects that you are working on with the Natural Step?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Natural Step is in working in different countries at the same time. And so we have different offices. One of them would be in Canada. There's one in Sweden as well, in Israel. And each of us have our own specialties. That means we have our own focus areas. Canada, they're working more on circular economy, for example, or also the energy transition with regards to the oil that is now currently or they're working on alternatives now for more renewable energy. In Israel, we're working on food waste. And one of the things that we're working on, this is more like an international collaboration, is actually on sustainable chemical management. That's an interesting one because currently there's so much focus on climate, but one of the next big issues that we'll have is where pollution is taking place more and more, right? We see all the plastics around us, and those are the visible things that we see. We see them in our oceans. We call them plastic oceans, and we're surprised about the number of the volumes of plastics that are around. But can you imagine that all these chemicals that are related to the products that we have and the things that end up in the toilet water or anywhere else, that they actually are invisible, but at the same time also spreading in our air, in our water, in our soil. And one of the things that we're working on is to ensure that the chemical industry in general is moving towards the right way. We do that, for example, through publications with UNEP or other more intergovernmental organizations. But at the same time, we are also working with, for example, Vinyl Plus, which is a voluntary initiative of the PVC industry. Now, PVC is considered devil of materials, or at least it used to be. But at the same time, there are so many advantages of the product if you would take out the unsustainable aspects of it. Now, over the past 2 decades, we've been working with the industry to ensure that some of these major challenges have been taken out. It doesn't mean that, and that is specifically for Europe, it doesn't mean that it's a 100% sustainable thing, but it means that if you need to make choices, for example, for a water pipe underneath the soil, underneath your house, then, well, making that from wood doesn't help. Making it from stone or metal, it has its disadvantages. But if you have a PVC pipe, then all of a sudden that all the performance requirement can be met, but you need to ensure that it is managed in a sustainable way. And then all of a sudden, this is probably one of the best materials you have, as long as you then also recycle it by the end of its life cycle. So that those are just some simple examples to explain that, yeah, the work that we're currently doing with the chemical industry is a very relevant one. And there's still so much to do due to the growth of the industry on a global level, right?
The fact that your organization is not addressing one issue, it's addressing several issues in several different locations, it's very wonderful, because the more issues that you can cover, the more attention that you can bring, and the more solutions that can be implemented. And the fact that you described the work that you and your team are doing in Israel on about chemicals, and you mentioned we can see visible things in terms of plastic and everything, but the effect of chemicals that are not seen every day. It doesn't come right up to our mind, but the fact that those chemicals have more danger, more harm than other things, and there needs to be change in the industry of the chemicals itself, although it's such a huge industry, and you are bringing attention to that, and you're working on finding sustainable solutions with corporations in regards to finding the reusing materials and building a more sustainable materials is very, very important.
Of course, there's one comment I would like to make, and that is that, of course, we are not ourselves working in each of these teams. Our colleagues in Israel should definitely get the credit for all of that, and our colleagues in Canada for that. But that's the advantage if you have a clear language on what sustainability is about, and you have clear design principles, then basically you can work around the world, and you know that you're all working towards the same target.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you for correcting me. And whether you are based on the part of your organization is based in Canada or Israel, you are all working under, yes, you mentioned the same goal of making sure that the earth strives on the resources it has, but not eliminating all of its resources, but building in a sustainable, living in a sustainable way. We talked about how can organizations take part in building sustainability, but me as individuals and our viewers and listeners as individuals, how can we take part in building a sustainable future for ourselves and being future fit?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's first of all, it's about asking the right questions or asking questions in general about the topic. You see too many individuals respond to topics with some form of ignorance, I would say, whether it's about climate or whether it's about other topics. And I think asking questions and having dialogues that matter, that is where it really starts. And if you then ask for, okay, what are the most impactful things that we can do? I would say it's start looking around you in your house, and with all the things that you're currently doing, your activities. But probably one of the most important ones is the way that you spend your money. Mm-hmm. It is your wallet that counts often more than the way that you vote on the political leaders in your in your country, right? Independent of how that is exactly structured. But your wallet is so important. And especially now with Corona, we can see that purchasing is going up because it now has to be ordered. People don't, well, they're at home, they have COVID around them, they can't do too much. But you see that the number of orders that are going out are only increasing. And I would suggest to take a look at whether you really need things as much as you think you need them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And of course, big impacts would as well with regards to food or clothing. And then you can start looking at these individual topics of what is most relevant. And then one of the factors that is really relevant is also plant-based diets versus meat, with all the impacts that it has. And that's probably the biggest factor of impact that you could make, which is related to climate, but also related to chemical pollution from the GMOs and from the various aspects that relate to food creation, right? Food production.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, the comparison that you made about your vote versus your wallet. Your wallet is more important when it comes to making a change compared to your vote in the election ballot. So that's very important to realize that where we spend our money impacts the world, impacts our environment, and impacts the future. And if we become, as you mentioned, a consumer that is very conscious of the purchases that we make, of the food that we consume, of the clothing that we wear, we can take part into making a world more future fit. So that's very, very important. If someone would like to support the natural step, how can they do that?
Well, they can go to the website and see whether that would provide them some information already. In the different countries, different services are provided. Some courses are being given, and I would say join them. You know, understand the language of full sustainability, because with that you can actually help, whether it's within your community or within the organizations that you work with or buy from. I would say that we are not living from donations or anything like that. For us, we like to think that we need to do things to for the money that we get. So I would say, yeah, start purchasing our services.
Absolutely. The link to the Natural Step website I will be providing in the description, so you viewing or listening can go to the website and familiarize yourself with the subject of sustainability and take courses and be more conscious consumer and take part into making a world a better place. Thank you so much, Edwin. It was wonderful to get to know you and the great work that you and your team are doing at Sustainable Growth Associates, as well as the Natural Step.
Thank you so much for having me, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
For you listening, if you enjoyed this conversation, please press like and share button, because this will show the YouTube and podcast algorithms that this conversation is important, that organization and individuals need to be prepared for the future in terms of sustainability. Thank you, and see you in the next episode.